Have you ever watched someone reach for a pen and immediately thought, wait, something about them is different? Not in a bad way, but in a way that feels almost magnetic, almost like they carry a quiet secret the rest of the world doesn't quite understand. Or maybe you are the one who has spent your entire life bumping into a right-handed world, smearing ink across a freshly written page, twisting your wrist at an awkward angle in school desks that were never designed for you, and somehow always feeling like your brain works on a slightly different frequency than the people around you. Here is what most people never stop to consider. The way you use your hands is not just a quirk of motor preference. It is a window into how your brain is organized, how you process emotion, how you navigate creativity and adversity, and even how you experience stress in ways that are fundamentally different from the 90% of the population who never had to think twice about any of this. And the psychology behind it goes far deeper than you might expect. Left-handedness has been misunderstood for centuries. In medieval Europe, it was considered a mark of the devil. In the 20th century, children were physically punished in classrooms for using their left hand to write. Even the word sinister, which we now use to mean evil or threatening, comes directly from the Latin word for left. That is the weight of cultural bias that left-handed people have carried for generations without fully realizing it. But here's the thing that researchers have spent the last several decades trying to understand. Left-handedness is not simply a matter of which hand you prefer. It reflects a fundamentally different pattern of brain lateralization, meaning the way the two hemispheres of your brain divide their responsibilities is organized differently in left-handed people compared to most of the population. In the majority of right-handed people, language, logic, and analytical thinking are almost exclusively housed in the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere handles creativity, spatial awareness, and emotion. It's a clean division, a tidy system. In left-handed people, that division is far less predictable. Some left-handers have reversed lateralization. Others have a much more bilateral brain, meaning both hemispheres share responsibilities in ways that create unusual connections between logic and emotion, between language and spatial thinking, between analytical reasoning and creative intuition. And if you're left-handed, or if you know someone who is, you may be experiencing the psychological consequences of that unique wiring right now, without ever having had the language to describe what is happening. In this video, we're going to explore 7 fascinating psychological traits and tendencies that research has linked to left-handedness. Traits that touch everything from how you experience fear, to how you approach creativity, to why certain kinds of social situations feel uniquely exhausting for you, in ways that might never feel exhausting for the people beside you. Make sure you watch all the way to the end, because the 7th trait is the one that surprises people the most, and it might be the one that finally explains something you have wondered about yourself for years. Let's start with the first one. Trait 1. You experience negative emotions more intensely. The first thing to understand about the psychology of left-handed people is something that might feel uncomfortable to hear, but that research consistently confirms. Left-handed individuals tend to experience negative emotions with greater intensity than their right-handed counterparts. A landmark study published in the journal Neuropsychology found that left-handed people show greater activation in the right hemisphere of the brain when processing fearful and anxious stimuli. Because the right hemisphere is more strongly associated with negative emotional processing, and because left-handers often have stronger right hemisphere dominance or bilateral engagement, they tend to feel fear, anxiety, sadness, and anger in a way that is more vivid, more visceral, and harder to simply push aside. What does this look like in real life? It looks like being the person who cannot watch a distressing news story without carrying it around for the rest of the day. It looks like replaying an uncomfortable conversation long after everyone else has moved on. It looks like feeling the weight of a difficult moment with a kind of intensity that makes people around you say, "You're too sensitive," not understanding that what they're calling sensitivity is actually a neurological difference in emotional depth. This doesn't mean left-handed people are more anxious by nature in a way that is fixed and unchangeable. It means that the emotional signal, when it arrives, is louder. And understanding that distinction, that your nervous system is simply more sensitive to the frequency of difficult emotion, is the beginning of being able to work with it rather than against it. This emotional intensity doesn't exist in isolation, though. It connects directly to the next trait, which has to do with how left-handed people respond when that intensity builds into something more difficult to manage. Trait 2. You are more vulnerable to certain mental health challenges, but also more resilient. Research has shown that left-handedness is statistically associated with higher rates of certain mental health conditions, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and schizophrenia.
A 2013 study published in the Sage Open Journal found that among patients in a mental health outpatient clinic, 40% identified as left-handed, a figure significantly higher than the approximately 10% of the general population who are left-handed. Before you feel alarmed by that statistic, it is important to understand what it does and does not mean. It does not mean that being left-handed destines you for mental illness. It means that the same neurological architecture that makes you emotionally sensitive, more bilaterally connected, and less rigidly lateralized also makes you more susceptible to the disruptions that lead to certain psychological difficulties, particularly when those difficulties are triggered by a world that was not designed for the way your brain works. Think about what a left-handed child experiences from the very beginning of their education. Every desk, every pair of scissors, every spiral notebook is designed for the right hand. The act of writing itself, the most fundamental tool of learning, is physically awkward, smearing, uncomfortable. You are spending cognitive resources on compensating for a physical environment that does not accommodate you, while simultaneously trying to learn at the same pace as everyone else. That is a chronic, low-grade stressor that begins in childhood and rarely fully disappears. And yet, and this is what makes left-handed psychology genuinely complex, that same experience of navigating a non-accommodating world appears to build a specific kind of resilience. Left-handed people who successfully develop coping strategies for the challenges of living in a right-handed world often show remarkable adaptability, creative problem-solving, and psychological flexibility. They have, in a very real sense, been training for adversity since they first picked up a pencil. That resilience shows up particularly clearly in the next trait, which has to do with how left-handed people approach creative thinking. Trait 3. Your brain is wired for divergent thinking. One of the most well-documented findings in the psychology of handedness is the relationship between left-handedness and divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple, unconventional solutions to a single problem rather than converging on the single correct answer. A study conducted by researchers at the University of Athens found that left-handed individuals consistently outperformed right-handed individuals on tasks measuring creative flexibility, originality, and fluency of ideas. The leading explanation for this finding returns to the concept of brain lateralization. When neither hemisphere is fully dominant, when your brain is organized around bilateral cooperation rather than strict hemispheric specialization, the connections between analytical thinking and creative thinking are more fluid, more accessible, and more easily activated. The result is a mind that moves between modes of thinking in a way that feels natural rather than effortful. You can be in the middle of solving a practical problem and suddenly see an elegant, unexpected solution that a more lateralized thinker might never reach, not because you are smarter, but because your cognitive pathways take routes that others do not have easy access to. This is why when you look at lists of famous left-handed individuals throughout history, you find an extraordinary concentration of creative and visionary thinkers. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Beethoven, Paul McCartney, Jimi Hendrix, Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, all left-handed, all known for exactly the kind of boundary-crossing, category-defying thinking that bilateral brain organization facilitates. But here's what the research also shows. This gift for divergent thinking comes with a shadow. The same cognitive flexibility that enables creative leaping also makes it genuinely harder to stay on a single track. Left-handed people are more likely to report difficulty with sustained focus on repetitive or purely convergent tasks. The mind wants to move, to explore, to connect, and channeling that into structured linear output requires a deliberate effort that right-handed people with more lateralized brains may never have to consciously make. Understanding this about yourself changes everything. It means the times you have felt scattered or unable to finish what you started were not a personal failure. They were your brain's natural inclination toward breadth, bumping up against a world that rewards depth and linearity. And that tension leads directly into the next psychological trait. Trait 4. You process language differently, and it shows up in unexpected ways. Language is one of the most studied areas of lateralization research, and it is also one of the areas where left-handedness produces the most surprising and counterintuitive findings. In right-handed individuals, language is almost universally processed in the left hemisphere. It's one of the most reliable facts in all of neuroscience. But in left-handed people, the picture is dramatically more varied.
Studies using brain imaging technology have found that approximately 30% of left-handers process language primarily in the right hemisphere. Another 30% process language in both hemispheres simultaneously. Only about 40% follow the typical left hemisphere pattern. What does it mean to process language bilaterally or in the right hemisphere? It means that language, for many left-handed people, is not purely a logical, sequential operation. It is deeply entangled with imagery, emotion, metaphor, and associative thinking. Left-handed people are more likely to think in complex analogies, to reach for a metaphor when a direct description feels insufficient, and to communicate meaning through narrative and implication rather than blunt statement. This shows up in the way left-handed individuals write. Research on creative writing has found that left-handers tend to produce more complex sentence structures, more emotionally resonant language, and more unexpected associative leaps, not because they are trying to be literary, but because that is simply how language assembles itself in their minds. It also shows up in the way left-handed people sometimes struggle in environments that reward purely literal, sequential communication, like corporate meetings, standardized testing, or bureaucratic procedures that have no room for nuance or complexity. In those environments, the richness of the way a left-handed mind uses language can feel like a liability rather than an asset. And that experience of being somewhat out of step with the dominant communication style of conventional environments connects naturally to the next psychological trait, one that has profound implications for how left-handed people navigate social life. Trait 5. You are wired to notice what others miss, but it can leave you feeling perpetually different. One of the lesser-known findings in left-handedness, research involves a heightened sensitivity to context and incongruity. Left-handed individuals consistently show stronger activation in the brain regions associated with detecting when something is unexpected, out of place, or inconsistent with established patterns. This is, in evolutionary terms, a survival advantage. The ability to rapidly detect an anomaly, a sound that does not fit the environment, a social dynamic that feels subtly wrong, a piece of information that contradicts an established framework, is an enormously valuable cognitive tool. In practice, it means left-handed people often notice things that other people walk right past. They pick up on the tension in a room before anyone has said anything. They notice the inconsistency in an argument before the speaker has finished making it. They read subtext fluently, sometimes exhaustingly so, because their brains are perpetually scanning for the thing that does not quite fit. But there is a cost to this kind of perception. When you consistently notice what others miss, social environments can become tiring in a very specific way. You are carrying more information than the people around you appear to be processing, and that gap between what you are perceiving and what is being collectively acknowledged can produce a persistent low-level sense of being slightly out of sync with the social world around you. Many left-handed people describe a feeling, difficult to articulate, of never quite being fully comfortable in large group settings. Not social anxiety in the clinical sense, but rather a kind of perceptual overload. Too much signal, too much subtext, too many layers of meaning arriving simultaneously. It is the experience of a nervous system that has never learned to filter as aggressively as the majority nervous system does. And that perceptual sensitivity is deeply related to the sixth psychological trait, which addresses something that left-handed people are rarely told, but which may be the most empowering thing in this entire video. Trait 6. You are cognitively faster under certain kinds of pressure. This one is counterintuitive, but the research supporting it is remarkably consistent. In competitive, high-stakes environments, particularly those involving rapid decision-making, pattern recognition under time pressure, and split-second spatial judgment, left-handed people show measurable cognitive advantages over their right-handed peers. A study published in the Journal of Sports Sciences found that left-handed athletes outperform their expected statistical representation in nearly every sport that involves rapid reaction to an opponent's movements. Tennis, boxing, cricket, fencing, baseball, in all of these disciplines, left-handed practitioners win at rates significantly above what their 10% of the population would predict. The leading explanation is that right-handed athletes have spent their entire careers practicing against other right-handed opponents. When a left-handed opponent appears, their movements, angles, and patterns are genuinely unfamiliar, and the left-handed athlete has, by necessity, become expert at decoding the patterns of a right-handed world. But this advantage extends beyond sports. Research in cognitive psychology has found that left-handed individuals show faster processing speeds on tasks that require integrating information from both hemispheres simultaneously. Because the corpus callosum, the bridge of neural fibers connecting the two hemispheres, is typically thicker and more developed in left-handed people, the transfer of information between the analytical and creative regions of the brain happens faster. This means that in genuinely novel situations where no established rule or formula applies, where you must synthesize disparate information rapidly and generate a response, left-handed brains have a structural edge. The very architecture that makes linear, sequential tasks slightly more effortful is the same architecture that makes truly complex, high-integration challenges feel almost natural.
Left-handed people are, in a very real psychological sense, specialists in exactly the conditions that are most difficult to train for: novelty, pressure, and complexity arriving simultaneously. And that brings us to the seventh and final trait, the one that ties all of this together into a picture that once you see it, you will not be able to unsee. Trait 7. You have spent your life adapting to a world that wasn't built for you, and that has shaped your entire psychological identity. This is the one that surprises people. Everything we have discussed in this video, the emotional intensity, the creative flexibility, the language complexity, the perceptual sensitivity, the speed under pressure, all of it exists within a broader psychological context that is unique to left-handed people. The lifelong experience of being a cognitive and physical minority in a world designed by and for the majority. Psychologists who study the experience of left-handedness describe something they call invisible minority stress, the chronic, low-level psychological burden of navigating environments, tools, systems, and social expectations that were never designed with you in mind. Unlike visible minority experiences, this stress is almost never acknowledged, almost never discussed, and almost never validated by the people around you, because most of them have no idea it exists. From the first day you sat in a right-handed school desk, to every pair of scissors that is cut at the wrong angle, to every spiral notebook that has pressed its coils into your writing hand, to every handshake and every guitar lesson and every smeared page of notes, you have been making thousands of micro-adaptations every single day. Adaptations that require cognitive effort and that accumulate over a lifetime into a distinctive psychological texture. And here is what that texture produces when you look at the research. Left-handed people show higher rates of ambidextry, meaning they're more likely to have developed genuine competence in both hands. They show higher rates of what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch between mental frameworks rapidly. They show stronger empathy scores on average, likely because a lifetime of being the person who does not quite fit the default mold produces an intuitive understanding of what it feels like to navigate a world designed for someone else. The psychology of left-handedness is, at its deepest level, the psychology of adaptation, of a mind that has been training since childhood to function excellently in conditions of misalignment and has discovered in the process strengths that a perfectly accommodated brain might never have needed to develop. Now that you have walked through all 7 of these psychological traits, I want to invite you to do something simple but genuinely valuable. Think about your own life, or the life of the left-handed person you know best, and ask yourself, how many of these traits map onto real experiences? The emotional depth that has always felt like too much, the creative leaps that happen in the middle of solving a completely unrelated problem, the tiredness after social environments that seem effortless for everyone else, the moments of unexpected clarity under pressure when something complex resolves itself almost too quickly. These are not random personality quirks. They're the fingerprints of a particular kind of brain, shaped by a particular kind of experience, producing a particular kind of human being. And whether you are left-handed yourself or whether someone in your life is, understanding this changes the way you interpret behavior, the way you offer support, and the way you extend patience to others and to yourself. If something in this video resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because there are left-handed people walking around right now who have spent decades being told that their way of experiencing the world is a problem to be corrected, and what they actually need is someone to hand them a mirror and say, "No, this is just how your brain works, and it is extraordinary." If this exploration of how handedness shapes psychology has opened something for you, there is a natural next question waiting to be asked. If something as seemingly simple as hand preference can shape this much of your psychological experience, what else about your early neurological development is quietly influencing who you are right now without your awareness? That question is exactly what our next video explores. We go deep into the psychology of birth order, the largely invisible but surprisingly powerful way that the order in which you were born into your family has shaped your personality, your ambitions, your relationship to authority, and your emotional default settings. It is the kind of video that makes you look at your siblings differently and at yourself with new clarity. You'll find it linked on the screen right now and in the description below. Thank you genuinely for spending this time here and watching all the way through. The fact that you stayed tells me you're someone who takes your inner life seriously, and that is exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. If this video gave you something, a new way of seeing yourself, a new way of understanding someone you love, a word for something you have felt but never been able to name, please take 2 seconds and hit the like button. It's the single most powerful thing you can do to help this kind of content reach the people who need it most. Now I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me which of these 7 traits felt most like looking in a mirror for you or for someone you know. Was it the emotional intensity, the creative wiring, the experience of feeling perpetually slightly out of step with the world around you? Leave your answer below. I genuinely read every comment, and the conversations that happen in this community are one of my favorite parts of doing this work. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. We're building something here together, and I'm glad you're part of it.